It's my pleasure to introduce our two new fellows for 2024. And I really appreciate that both of them have worked at experimental forests, which are near and dear to my heart. And so, first fellow we'll be introducing is Dr. Robert Hall. He's currently a distinguished professor of limnology at Flathead Lake Biological Station, Montana. And before that, he was at University of Wyoming from 1998 to 2017. As a grad student at University of Georgia with Judy Meyer, he began studies of stream, carbon, nitrogen cycling food webs at Coweta Experimental Forest. And then he followed that with a postdoc with Dr. Gene Likens at Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest. Bob's contributions to SFS have been significant. He's been an active member of the society since graduate school, has been a vice president of SFS, an associate editor for Freshwater Science for over 15 years, and currently serves on our publication committee. His current work links geomorphology to stream metabolism and nutrient cycling. He does time series of analysis of river metabolism, food webs, spent his career working on isotope tracers, statistical modeling, dissolved organic and inorganic carbon in rivers. Throughout Bob's career, he's really pushed the field of freshwater science into new dimensions, and many of us have benefited from our interactions with Bob. Both Bob and Bill have had central roles in the low-dig intersite nitrogen experiment collaborations that went on for 15 years and kind of continue in some ways. So looking at stable isotope, that's a fun word in this mic, traces in food webs, in river uptake. And alongside Bob's excellence in research and substantial contributions to freshwater science, the colleagues who nominated Bob cite his collaborative spirit and widespread generosity and mentorship. Not only has Bob's research been well published and cited, he's also trained a number of excellent freshwater scientists who are actively engaged in research and education around freshwater science and are active members of SFS. Come on up, Bob, and we'll... Our next fellow is Dr. William H. McDowell, who's recently become a professor emeritus from UNH and has become a research professor, a part-time research professor at FIU, Florida International University. Many of you may have been attending the special session, so you know how much training Bill has been doing and highlights of his research. Bill earned his PhD from Cornell University working on dissolved organic matter dynamics at Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest with Dr. Gene Likens. He is a fellow of both the American Association for Advancement of Science and the American Geophysical Union, the AGU. Bill's research focus has been towards increasing our understanding of fundamental interactions between nutrients and dissolved organic matter, and the ways in which land use, soils, hydrologic flow paths, and extreme events, including hurricanes, affect a wide range of ecological processes in freshwater. He has started and continues long-term research both in the streams at the Luquillo Experimental Forest in Puerto Rico and at the suburban Lamprey River of New Hampshire. And as I mentioned, Bill was has been an active member in Links 1 and 2. Bill's also dedicated much of his research to mentorship of early career scientists, as you can see from the special session. And he's mentored countless undergrads, over 50 undergrads at UNH and University of Puerto Rico. Many of these graduate students continue a strong commitment to working with Hispanic and Latinx students from Puerto Rico. Bill's also, before this, or maybe after this, agreed to be the program chair for next year. So, so come on up, Bill. Last year, because we were in Brisbane, we did not honor our fellows for the 2023 class. And those who are in the room, would you please stand up so we can induct you and thank you to this? Will Clements, Dave Strayer, Bern Sweeney, Jim Thorpe, Nancy Tuckman. I think James Thorpe is here. Are you? Well, let's honor them. We do have a number of fellows of freshwater science. These are listed on the webpage. They really honor the folks who have made career contributions to the society. So moving on to thinking about our plenary. I'm excited to be able to introduce Alison Meadow, who's our plenary speaker for today. Several of our award winners and committee chairs this week have been mentioning the values of partnerships. Engaged research, transformational science, co-production. We have lots of different words for it, but the idea of working with partners to enhance our research and to have input and collaborations with practitioners much more. But we all know how stretched we are, and partnerships take time. Alison has impressed me with some of her papers about how to have these kinds of partnerships effectively and efficiently. So I look forward to her talk this morning. She is currently an associate research professor in the Office of Societal Impact at University of Arizona. She received her bachelor's degree in Native Studies and Anthropology from Trent University, Ontario, Canada, her master's in American Indian Studies from University of Arizona, and her PhD in Anthropology through Interdisciplinary Reliance and Adaptation Program at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. So she's worked in multiple systems. Her research focuses on the processes of linking scientists with decision makers to improve the usability of science, and she's focusing primarily on climate science as she thinks about these societal impacts. She works frequently with researchers and research programs to plan effective and engaged research and also assess the outcomes and impacts of that work. Alison also works through the NOAA-funded climate assessment for the Southwest to support communities in the Southwest as they undertake climate change adaptation and planning efforts. So, Alison? And if you could switch slides.
Hi, thank you. I see what we mean about the lights, but I think I've got this. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you so much, Sherry and David, for inviting me. I had a chance to see a number of the sessions yesterday, and I've just really enjoyed hearing and learning more about the work that everyone at SFS is doing. Thanks for making me feel really welcome here, despite the fact that I'm not a freshwater scientist. Okay, so I'm going to talk about engaged research and societal impact and share some of the work that we've been doing and just some thoughts on, as Sherry said, this complex, complicated, but I think really necessary part of the work that we collectively want to do. I'm going to give you just a really brief introduction. As Sherry said, I work mostly with climate and environmental research programs, mostly in that climate change space. And I just wanted to sort of introduce a little bit about some of the programs that I work with, and that sort of helps set the stage for the way that I think about the work that we've been doing. So as Sherry said, one of the main programs that I work with is CLIMAS, or the Climate Assessment for the Southwest. We're funded by NOAA through their Climate Program Office, and we are 25 years old at this point. We have a very specific mission to connect climate science to decision making. So we work with partners in Arizona and New Mexico with the goal to develop sustainable answers to our regional climate challenges. And we'll work with anybody from communities through large-scale decision makers, agencies, our water providers, et cetera. Anybody who needs climate science information, we would love to work with, and we use sort of an engaged approach. I've also been really fortunate to work with both the Northwest and the Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Centers. These are funded by Department of Interior through the U.S. Geological Survey. And the focus of that network, and those centers in particular, to deliver science to help fish, wildlife, water, land, and people adapt to a changing climate. Both programs, I know it doesn't make doesn't seem like it makes sense to have worked with the Northwest, but because I'm based in Tucson. But the mission about connecting science with decision making is really clear through that network and through those particular centers. As Sherry said, my institutional home at University of Arizona is in a slightly odd spot, but it's a really cool new office that Arizona started about 4 years ago called the Office of Societal Impact. We sit under the Vice Presidents for Research. And our goal is to help make the research enterprise more inclusive and to focus on the impacts to people and communities. We like to say we help to translate the curiosity and expertise of researchers into policies, practices, and programs that benefit society. So it's been a really wonderful place for me to sit because it fits so many of my interests. So it's really through these programs and then through my own research that I have worked at every level, from communities up through resource managers, policymakers, and then spending a lot of time lately with my fellow colleagues, with researchers, to really help build engaged research skills, expertise, and know-how at our university. But as I said, not a freshwater scientist. This is actually how I usually engage with freshwater. Love to jump in the lakes and swim. So I am, however, a really big fan of fresh and healthy water. So talk to me about open water swimming. And yes, Southern Arizona does have lakes, and they're really pretty. Okay, so going back to the title of the talk, I want to just define my terms a little bit. So we started with engaged research and societal impact. Engaged research is an approach to research in which we bring our non-academic partners, their lived experience, their expertise, and their knowledges. They are meaningfully involved as equal participants in the research process. The goal is to generate useful research and solutions to problems that are simply too complex for traditional disciplinary approaches. Yesterday's speaker talked about wicked problems. We use that term all the time. When there is just no clear-cut answer, we really want to bring lots of different insights to the table to help us tease it out. As Sherry said, there are a number of related terms. I think of us as one big happy family. Sometimes there are, interfamily squabbles. But some of the terms that you may have heard that for engaged research: community-based participatory research, transdisciplinary research. Sometimes you hear the term co-production of knowledge, knowledge exchange. Again, there's a lot of shared DNA, and we do things maybe slightly differently, but our big goals are all the same. And then when I say societal impacts, I'm thinking about the ways that research, or really importantly, the process of doing our research, influences the world beyond academia. We are all pretty darn good at those academic impacts. We know what we're doing in that space, and now we wanted to look at the next circle out. And how is that work making it to our societal partners, our communities, decision makers? Those are the impacts that we're talking about. Okay, how does this work? Engaged research. It starts, I'm just going to, I consider these the fundamentals. It starts with good research. it's got to be good, right? Both for our own professional standards, but we need to keep in mind when we're talking about doing engaged research, we are probably asking people to make decisions about their lives and livelihoods based on the research that's coming out. So we owe it to our partners, we owe it to ourselves to make this the highest quality research. I always start with this because, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, there is a little bit of a misperception sometimes about, oh, well, you know, if you're talking with other people, if you're involving non-scientists, maybe it's not as rigorous. And I push back entirely on that. I think this has to be of the highest standards because we are affecting, our goal is to affect people's lives with the work that we're doing. Then we need to have a way to connect that research to society, a pathway. Somehow it's got to get out, right? You can't just keep it to ourselves. It has to make it out into the world. So there's lots of different ways to do that, and we're going to talk through a few of those. It depends on the context you're working in, the partners that you have. How are you going to make that connection? How are you going to make sure that the research makes it out to the world? We know from the world of engaged research and the work that we do sort of looking inward on ourselves that it tends to be that more engaged approaches when we are directly collaborating with partners, with community members, practitioners, the more engagement tends to make that research more usable and get it out and make it more used. So we want to think along a bit of a continuum. It doesn't mean that everything has to be on the far end, but we do know that that does tend to move things along quite a bit faster. Our societal partners are the ones that use that research, right? They need to take it up and decide what to do with it. So we need to be thinking about the fit of the research to their goals and priorities. We need to be thinking about the accessibility of the research. So, you know, can they get it? How is it getting into their hands so that they can use it, they can take it up and then make decisions based on it. So we need to also be thinking about whether it fits the environment in which they're making decisions, their decision context, or sometimes we talk about the information use environment. Organizational readiness comes into this play. Do our partners have the capacity, the interest, the will, the ability to make change? All of that will come out through that process of engagement, and we'll be able to sort of understand how to tailor the outputs, the findings, to best fit. So they're the ones that are going to use that research. And then that research, we hope, use of that research changes something. Hopefully for the best, for a person, an organization, a community, for an ecosystem. And that's sort of the basics, those 4 steps. You don't have to read this, but I wanted to provide just a really brief kind of example from the work that we do through CLEMAS in the Southwest, just to illustrate a few of those points. So this is a project that my colleagues and I started all the way back in 2009. We were approached by leadership from the Hopi Department of Natural Resources and their rangeland management program. And they were really worried about drought conditions in the Four Corners region of the Southwest and not really being able to figure out, hey, you know, we have to make management decisions, but there aren't enough weather stations. We don't have enough like physical data to make the decisions that we feel like we need to. Can you come and help? You know, work with us on this. So we sat down, spent a lot of time, and co-developed a project where to develop a local drought information system. We really wanted to highlight biophysical indicators that were relevant and available, made sense in the environment that we were working with, combine that with some of the hydrometeorological data that is available, and really come up with something that is usable in the context that the rangeland managers were making decisions. Took a lot of time. It took a lot of conversations on a lot of trips up there. I remember it well because my little one was very little, and he was coming along with us and hanging out, and and just like spending time in the outdoors and meeting people. So what we developed was this local, a combination, a drought information system that took community relevant observations that they already had access to. They had a wealth of knowledge about the system that they were looking at. Range conditions, local rain gauges, take all of that, combine that with the climate data that was accessible. And we came up with a little system that was pretty usable, creating these regular summaries of drought conditions. And our feedback from our partners was, hey, this is working. This is helping us understand what's going on. When we're talking about making decisions these are really high stakes for a small community. They were needing to decide about livestock impoundment, and that's a really big deal when you're talking about very, very small scale ranchers whose livelihood depends on the ability to have their cattle grazing. And so these are, maybe it's only a few head of cattle, but it's a really, really big deal to the ranchers in this community. And so the managers really wanted to know, are we, when do we get to a threshold when it is absolutely necessary to make this decision? And without that sort of local ground truth data, they weren't able to do that. They feel like they are now. And the really cool thing about this project is that the partnership picked up again. We've never really lost track, but they just called again and said, hey, I think we're ready for the next step. What else can we do together to refine this system? Okay. So that was sort of the illustration. Okay, maybe you've already answered this question. Why should we practice engaged research? I'm going to talk through a few of my talking points, I guess. And if you are still skeptical, maybe this will convince you. First is the idea of a social contract, and this was articulated really nicely by Jane Lubchenco a number of years ago. And it basically rests on the idea that our society, our community is investing in our science through our tax dollars. They're basically paying for a lot of the work that we do. And that they want two outcomes from that investment: best possible science and something useful. And she articulated this as the social contract. In exchange for society's investment in our work, we owe something back. I work at a land-grant university. So we have particular need to serve our communities. Our land-grant universities were founded specifically to benefit the public, and the research that we do really needs to serve that need. This comes from a report from about 5 years ago by the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, where they were articulating the idea, I didn't put it on my initial terms, but they used the term public impact research, and they're really making the case that our public and land-grant universities need to be investing in public impact research. And they make a point that I want to stress, because we're going to talk a little bit more through this. We need to emphasize the value, not just of serving communities, but the value of collaborative research with communities, not just about communities. And I think that's a really important distinction that doesn't always get made and needs to when we're talking about in this space. This is collaborative. This is equal partnerships, and I really like that APLU is calling for that shift as well, not just serving the needs of the public, but with the public. I think of this topic, the scholarship of engagement that Ernest Boyer wrote about in the 90s. This helped set the stage for the idea of the Carnegie engagement classification, and he spoke very broadly about the scholarship of engagement. This is sort of the moral argument for doing engaged research. And he talks about our outstanding universities being one of the greatest hopes for intellectual and civic progress in the country, and that the academy must become a more vigorous partner in the search for answers. I think about all of the resources that we have at our disposal at our universities, not just the money, but access to all of those journals, access to databases about where to find grants. Our colleagues look around at the incredible knowledge, and I don't want it locked in the proverbial ivory tower. We have these resources that can be and should be supporting our communities, working with our communities, and really thinking about shared knowledge. And this is what Boyer was talking about, is through that scholarship of engagement. Engage, share the wealth, share the knowledge, and we all make progress together. I think it's really good for science. Open science, obviously, it's not a new term, but it's becoming a little bit more of a common refrain in our communities lately. I really like, I chose this because I really like what UNESCO has talked about here. We often think about open science as that outward, right? That one way. Great, we're not gonna have, we're not gonna have things locked behind paywalls anymore. We're gonna have, all of our papers available, our data available. That's sort of that one way transfer out. UNESCO is saying, that's great, we absolutely need that. And then this third bullet point, it opens the process of scientific knowledge creation to societal actors beyond the traditional scientific community. That's about bringing folks in and working together. And that open science partly is about bringing people in, not just sharing outward. And finally, impact requires engagement. Right? So if our goal is problem solving, if our goal is, hey, we need to make some progress in this particular area, I see something happening, and we need to fix that, we have to have that engaged approach. Basically, like, we need all of the knowledge, all of the different perspectives, the knowledges, we need the how-to get this done, how to move this along within an organization or within a particular system. Collective wisdom, it's just, we have really big problems. We need more than our own brains at the table. And as I said earlier, we do know from the scholarship on engaged research processes that the more engagement that we have, it tends to move that research into action more quickly and effectively. So if the goal is on the ground change, we really do need to have an engaged approach. If none of that convinced you, although I hope it did, here's a very tangible reason. The funders are catching on. Our funders of science are actually starting to systematically change their expectations around this. This is just a small sample of some. I'm guessing people in this room have started to see RFPs come out that are using things like USDA, the Sustainable Agricultural Systems, is specifically using the term transdisciplinary research, and it is asking for outcomes of the work being proposed should result in societal benefits. And if you can't demonstrate that, that's going to mark you down on your proposals. Probably everyone's familiar with NSF. They've had the broader impacts categories for a number of years. It is systematically becoming more rigorous. They're taking more care in the review, that those broader impact statements are robust, that they really are meaningfully generating research that benefits society. So you're going to see a little bit more. And I added a couple of the smaller programs in there just to illustrate that. So NOAA, the Climate Adaptation Partnerships, that's what funds the CLIMAS program. They use the term engaged research, and they really want to see methods of engagement. And in fact, they're funding, piloting new methods of engagement. Come and experiment with your engagement and tell us what is working best to solve some of these problems. And this particular one was adaptation to flooding and wildfire. One other example is through Pew Charitable Trusts. A few years ago, a new network was created called the Transforming Evidence Funders Network. This is an international group of funders from philanthropy, from government, from the nonprofit sector, who have all come together to learn from each other and figure out how to better support engaged research across all disciplines, from the natural sciences, the health sciences, education, and it's sort of a mutual support and learning network. So we're starting to see this real change in the expectations. And so we've got to get good at this. Okay, so I said already, more engaged tends to move things into action a little bit faster. So if we want impact, we have to have that engagement. Why is that? Why isn't it just enough to say, but the science is really good, and we should leave it there? Why does this engagement piece, why is that so important? First, and actually we heard from this a little bit in one of the speakers yesterday morning. I really appreciated what he said. He was talking about, he can't possibly know everything about hydrology. I don't know if you're still here, but it was exactly what I was going to say here. even as much as we know, we can't possibly know we can't not know everything about a particular topic. So if we're doing engaged research, we're bringing people into the process who have lived experience with the systems that we're interested in. They have practical or professional expertise, policy expertise. They might know the local system, have local knowledge that is decades or even deeper that we don't have access to. I work a fair bit with Indigenous peoples, and so we're talking Indigenous knowledges that we can trace back thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Deep, deep knowledge of system and place. And when we start to bring all of that in, to me it feels like the possibilities are endless. We suddenly have unlocked an enormous amount of understanding of our systems. Very practically, if we're not involving the people who know about the system that we're interested in changing, how to make change in that system, then we're still going to hit that brick wall, right? I said it at the beginning. It is our societal partners who ultimately have to take this up and use it. And the more that we know and the more that we've integrated their knowledge about how to make change in their community, how to make change in their agency or in the policy realm, the faster we're going to get to some of those answers. And basically, and this goes back to the idea of the wicked problems, none of the big thorny issues that we've been talking about can possibly be solved or siloed, just in science. We've got to be willing to think about values, law, policy, psychology, and how people respond to us, et cetera. And so when we bring that in, we get a big perspective on things, and we get a little closer to finding some solutions. I said this already, but it's really important, I think, to keep hitting it again. We've got to involve the people who can enact the change. I like this change. Sometimes we think of a little logic model that just says we're gonna okay, we've done the research, somebody's gonna, and then it'll go out in the world and something will change because of that research. But we're really missing this important part of we've got to make that connection to the people who need to use this. They need to be able to use it, and then it is our partners in this, our practitioner partners or our policy partners who are going to be doing the implementation. We really need to be aware of that and bringing their expertise in as early as possible. Again, inform how we are going to structure and share the research information in order to make sure that it gets out into the world effectively. Engagement makes the research salient and it makes it accessible. When we start talking with our societal partners right at the beginning, we make sure that our questions actually address their concerns, their priorities, the decisions that they need to make, rather than maybe just coming in with our own ideas about, I think this is really important. We get to hear directly from the people who are saying, hey, I need to do something in this system. Can you come in and help me answer and tease out these questions? We make it accessible through the topic that we're choosing. It's really relevant to the decision context, to what they need to be able to do. The language becomes accessible. We start to learn each other's language. We make sure that we're sharing information in a way that resonates with the community. There's the physical access issue. Obviously, this is getting much, much, much better with open access publishing, but there's even still a big difference between saying, okay, well, that's available online in open access, and maybe creating a summary for decision makers or a summary for community members that you can directly give to folks. That kind of access is a whole other level. And we're also going to work on this idea that fitting the environment and both the biophysical environment, but I kind of mean the organizational environment in which it's going to be used. If we know a lot about what that organization needs in terms of evidence, in terms of how the research is presented, who it needs to get to, that all makes up part of this information use environment. If we know that, again, we're kind of shortcutting, right? We can get it to the people who need to use it. We can get it to them in the formats that they need, and it speeds up that process. This is a really big one. I know we heard a little bit about this yesterday, but I'm going to hit it even harder today. It builds trust. people need to trust the science, and they need to trust the people developing the science before they are going to use it. This has become a pretty central topic, again, sort of in this weird little world of studying engaged research. Trust is really key, and it is emerging as the central piece, I think. We're taking the science out of the black box. If you're bringing people in, if you're doing field work with people, if you're sharing data analysis right from the beginning, all of a sudden this stuff is not unintelligible. It's, oh yeah, I saw how you did that. I understand sampling methods. I understand what you did here. I can see how this analysis is happening. That boosts the trust. It makes it easier for people to bring in new information because they understand how it's done. If you've been working with folks, if you've been really paying attention to what they're doing, they trust you. It makes that whole process easier. I boil this down all the time to the late, great Pat Summitt. Doesn't everything come back to it? They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think that's really the foundational piece. And again, I feel like she said it decades ago, and the research is really bearing this out. When we build trust, things move along. Science gets used. Decisions get made. Okay, so now I've totally convinced you, and you're saying, okay, great, let's do it. So what does it take? I'm going to kind of walk through some of the key components. Very first thing to think about is we kind of need to establish what our principles are. And this is something because this mode of doing research is relatively new in the climate and environmental sciences, I think it is really important to come back to these kind of bedrock principles. Engaged research is not new in many disciplines in the social sciences, certainly in the health sciences and education. And so we can really draw from decades and decades of work, bring it into our sphere. But I think it's really important to sit back and just say, what is our bedrock foundation? When things get bumpy, when things get messy, what are the things that we need to fall back on? First, engaged research, and so this little thing, you'll see, this is why I included co-production of knowledge. This one is articulating these principles through co-production of knowledge. It's all one big family. We need it to be context-based. Engaged research needs to be situated in a particular context, in a place or an issue. It's got to have a very clear set of boundaries because we want to bring about change. And if we're thinking, if it's just too diffuse, too big, we're not going to get that change. So we got to ground it in an issue and a context. It's pluralistic by definition. We're explicitly recognizing the multiple ways of knowing and doing, and we are sharing power amongst the people at the table, amongst our partners. It's got to be goal-oriented. There has to be a purpose to this research, and this is very helpful when mission creep happens in all of these research, and we get, oh, what about this? What about this? What about this? Being able to come back and say, okay, but this was the goal. This is what we wanted to achieve. And it should be shared, and this can be the very first set of conversations that you have. What is our goal amongst the scientists, amongst the practitioners, the community members? What is it that we want to know more about? What is it that we want to be able to do with this? So having that shared goal very clearly articulated is important. And obviously interactive, right? It's not really engagement if it's not interactive. So we want to see ongoing learning amongst the actors, ongoing and active engagement throughout the process, dialogue being kind of the foundation of those partnerships. It takes planning. We all plan our research. You lay out, here's my questions, here's the method that is most important. I'm designing my research. I'm really thinking through all of those steps. This is another piece that needs planning. You want to, as I said it just before, we need to be goal-oriented. You've got to keep that problem central in your mind. What are we trying to solve? This was from a paper a few years ago where we really we wanted to provide some advice and support for people who might be new to the engaged research tradition. And we recommended, once you've got your problem started, and you may even have your partners identified, and what it is that you want to do, Start with a really honest assessment of your research team. Do you know the context in which this research is going to take place? Maybe that's the biophysical context. Maybe it's the policy context. Maybe it's the community. How well do you know that? How well established are the relationships with your partners? Are these folks that you are just meeting and you've never worked with before, or is this partnerships that you've had for a number of years? Both of these things vary a fair bit, but they both really affect how fast we can sort of move into that trust building and move towards the research. So we advise that that be the very first step, and just sit and be honest about it. Do I really know this system, or is it going to take me some time, take our team some time to really get to know the players, get to know the environment? Do we really know partners? Do we already have a bit of, some shared trust, some shared language? How mature is our partnership? Or is that going to take some time? Because we know we need the trust in order to move things forward. Think about that, and then you can kind of plan the rest of your stages. You can think about how intense the engagement needs to be to address those two issues. Maybe you have really high, I've been working in this area for years. I know the people really well. I know exactly what we're doing. Your project is going to move quite a bit faster, and you're probably going to get to those impacts that we expect. You can probably push through like a new policy and, relatively quickly, maybe in that, 2 to 3 year science funding timeframe. If you're really new to a place and you need to spend some time developing both the context knowledge and those relationships, you got to shift your expectations a little bit and just be clear about that. That's going to take some time to build trust. I might just be getting to really understand the system by the end, and I need to be thinking about the kinds of outcomes and impacts that I can expect a little bit differently. The other thing is, you don't have to know everything yourself. Build a team. I'll talk about that in just a second, but it's not all on you. But it does take that careful thought and careful planning. So when you have that idea of like, okay, I know what I need to be doing in this space, what it's going to take to kind of move that research into use. We can think about, I used this term earlier, the pathways to impact. And there's a lot of them. I'm talking mostly here about the little box that's labeled number 10. This is not my research, but I really liked this paper. This looked at the Research Excellence Framework out of the UK, in which UK researchers have to submit impact case studies as part of their academic reward system. Not a perfect system, but one of the things that it has done is generate thousands and thousands and thousands of examples of academic research moving into societal use and impact. And this paper looked at some of the really common pathways along there. So that box number 1, the interactive dissemination pathway. If you've done your sort of assessment at the beginning and said, hey, I really know this system and I really know these people, and what I know that they need most to make decisions is they rely exclusively on peer-reviewed publications. The very best thing that I can possibly do for them is write a paper, make sure that it is super high quality science, it gets through peer review, and that's going to help them because they have to hit a certain policy standard for this. You might say, you know what, that interactive dissemination pathway, I know them, I know what they need is for me to hand over that paper as quickly and effectively as possible. That may be the perfect level of engagement in that situation. If not, if you're newer, if you don't know people as well, or we're dealing with kind of a thornier issue, a lot of values, lots of different players involved, you might need to look at that number 10, that research engagement, in which there's a lot of back and forth. The blue arrow is the research, the pink arrows are society, and you're going to need to build in and really think about that time to go lots and lots of back and forth, knowledge sharing, learning between the partners. So basically, I just wanted to say there's no one single way to do this, and there are lots of models out there to learn from. This is just another sort of hitting that point again. You do not have to come up with your own model for doing this. You do not have to reinvent the wheel. We've got decades and decades of research in the social sciences and the education and medical and community health that can help guide us. Now we've got several decades within the climate and environmental world. So you've got, your idea, you've done your context and you figured out, how much engagement that you're going to need, what that needs to look like. Draw from some of the traditions that are out there, and that's what this is a little bit of an older paper, but we sort of just wanted to point out, if you are wanting to really co-produce and engage, draw from some of the traditions that are there. Action research, transdisciplinary research. Boundary organizations are a really big one. Especially, for example, if you are new to a system, if you don't have the relationships in place, look around for a boundary organization, somebody who works at the intersection of science and society. Climate assessment for the Southwest, the CASC program that I mentioned, funded by Department of Interior. These are organizations that already exist who probably have a lot of those relationships. And that can be a really great way to say, hey, I really want to get involved in this work, and I need to sort of learn from or borrow some of the expertise from people who are already involved in there. For any of these things, make it part of your planning, make it part of your budgeting. Don't expect a boundary organization to just support your work. Make sure that you're building in budget and time to spend with them, even as you're saying, hey, you guys are the experts at engaging with this community or in this region, and I really need that space. It's not just a handoff, it's just a way for you to get more familiar and to build your own context knowledge and relationships. Skills. Everything that I have all talking about, right, is like talking with people. This is, for many people, a whole new way of doing research, and it does require new skills. It's epistemologically and methodologically different to have to think about all of these different knowledge bases, integrate different people's questions, integrate different people's knowledges, and it does require us to have additional skills. This is from a 2020 or 2021 paper where we articulated a number of different skills that we can develop at different career stages, which is partly why I just loved yesterday seeing the students so involved. So it seems to me that SFS is the perfect place to start thinking about this, because you're already thinking full career trajectory. How do we engage students and bring them into these conversations right at the beginning? So some of the skills that we've articulated as being really important here. All of a sudden you're dealing with, right, a whole lot of new people at the table with different expertise and different knowledge. Do you have the skills to collaboratively manage that team, to make sure that everybody is being heard, that power is being shared? Collaborative team management is a whole different way of doing business. Communication skills, being able to speak with your colleagues, being able to speak with practitioners who might not have, subject matter knowledge but have their own expertise, who might be needing to work directly with community members who are new to a science space. And we need to be able to engage with them respectfully, openly, transparently throughout this process. So communication skills become really important. I said all of a sudden we're dealing with a lot of people involved in what otherwise may have been kind of a biophysical research project. Qualitative data collection and analysis is really important. There are different skills, there are different ethics, and there are different expectations for how we use data that comes from the lived experience of people. Thinking about how you're bringing that into your team is really important. And being self-reflective and being willing to say, oh, not sure that worked out really well. How would I do that differently next time is actually a fantastic skill to build. This final point, build the teams. Again, we do not have to build every single one of these skills. I do not possess all of these skills. Nobody in this room possesses all of these skills. Think about this as a team approach and build your team appropriately. Okay, this is sort of this probably should have come first, but I'm going to end this little section with ethics. Ethics start at the beginning, they run all the way through, they keep going long after we have handed in papers and written final reports. bringing new people into our research changes the dynamics. We are also shifting dynamics even within a social science project. We stop thinking about people as subjects of our research and thinking about them as partners. It requires us to think about research ethics slightly differently. So a few years ago, a number of us sat down and said, how would we want to change the way or add to our ethical standards to make them work better for this kind of engaged and transdisciplinary research? So here's how we articulated it. We said our partners and their community, we have to think about how our partners and communities are represented in the research, both how they are represented at that table during the process, and then how they are represented when we share that research out publicly. Big part of our jobs as scientists is to write stuff down or give talks and talk about our research. And so we need to start thinking about the ways that we portray those research partners that we have brought in, the words that we use. Have they been part of the writing process so that they can say, hey, that's actually, what we would prefer if we framed this issue differently. We're leaving a lasting impression of the people that we work with in the scientific literature. We really need to make sure that that impression is fair and is not unintentionally pejorative. And unfortunately, we have a long history in the sciences of doing this badly, so that's why that's number one. We need to respect other ways of knowing and doing, and be willing to defer when our knowledge is not the most relevant in a situation. We are now talking about bringing people in who have, as I said at the beginning, they may have really deep knowledge of a system. And sometimes the best thing we can do is just say, hey, actually, I am not the primary here. Tell us, let's share what you know, and being willing to defer. And that also goes for our scientific colleagues. I am a social scientist. I spend a lot of time working with my biophysical colleagues. Sometimes it is my knowledge of, for example, qualitative research methods that is the most important in a particular situation. And we need to be willing to make those trade-offs and say, hey, actually, this is your space. On the flip side, I never claim to do the climate modeling that we represent. When we share stuff, I always make sure it's clear that was not me. I have, and fantastic and brilliant colleagues who do that work, and I'm just, sharing it with somebody. So be willing to defer. Really important, our communities and partners have the right to determine for themselves how and under what conditions they are going to participate. This is a particularly important point when working with Indigenous peoples, where consent is often communal rather than individual. Most of our research ethics frameworks are set up for individual consent. Yes, I consent to participate in this research, but when we're talking about spaces where knowledge might be community or communal knowledge, we really need to be thinking about communal consent. And there are different practices and policies in place when working with Indigenous peoples as opposed to any other research partners. But really importantly, the underpinning is your external partners are not obligated to engage. We need to, it needs to be consensual, and it needs to be that they want to be there. Which brings me to the last one, which is a reciprocal relationship. We are asking people to share their knowledge and expertise and come into this space. For a lot of us, we get paid to do this work. Great. If you are working with community members, with other practitioners, this is not their job. This is not their primary job. You are asking them to share something, might be something really precious, their knowledge and expertise. We really need to know, and this isn't, we think of this as good ethics, how to make sure that they are receiving direct benefit from the work that's going on. My research program, CLIMAS, recently we sat down, we spent a fair bit of time and developed for ourselves a set of ethical principles that we plan to just continually apply to our work. It's a living document. We say nothing is carved in stone, but I just wanted to share this, and that QR code should take you right there. Just as an example. So we've articulated those. It was very much based on the previous slide, but transparency, just being really open with our partners about everything. Again, representation, thinking about how we talk about people. Autonomy, people get to decide for themselves, reciprocity, that idea of direct benefit, and respecting diverse knowledges. And so if you're interested, that's there. And like we said, living document. Our goal is to continually reflect on how that is helping us work more effectively with our partners, and we will revise accordingly. Sherry talked a little bit about this before. I don't want to make this all sunshine and roses. This work is hard, and there are some real barriers that we need to acknowledge to doing this. First, there's no shortcuts. It just takes time to establish strong, trusting relationships. We need resources, we need skills. The good news is, as I said, the funders are starting to really change their thinking about this, and so there is more money available. They are starting to expect to see impacts planning and engagement plans and be willing to fund it. So that particular one is starting to get better. Some of our institutional structures don't support engagement particularly well. Our human subjects review boards are still used to seeing research participants subjects, not partners. They're not really set up always for community engagement and equal partnership. It can be really hard to compensate community partners as professionals, in exchange for sharing their knowledge. It can be hard. We just don't have great systems always in place, but we want to, that is a way to build a reciprocal relationship, treat people like professionals and sharing their knowledge. Our partners' institutions aren't always set up to do this either. If you're talking about resource managers, they might not have a whole lot of time on their plates to spend a lot of time, digging into the research and coming to meetings and workshops and stuff. So we need to be aware of that too. That neither institution is really set up to do this well. I mentioned very briefly, there are some misconceptions about the rigor of engaged research, and I hope that's changing. I hope that, as we start to see that this is just part and parcel of doing really good research, that this is not a watered down approach to research. In fact, to me, it's a higher level. This is even more complicated because we're bringing new people, new knowledge, new expertise in. And I think we're just being really transparent that science is messy, science is hard, and science is a social process. Academic reward structures, we are working, I say there's a lot of movement in this area to say, hey, we have to stop just judging our academics by how many peer-reviewed papers they publish, because we know this work is hard. And we need to, if you're writing a report, do you spend your time writing your peer-reviewed publication, or do you take the time to craft the report that goes to your partners because that is what they need? And it's all trade-offs, but I think we should be getting credit for those reports as well, or other outputs. Okay, how do we know if it's working? So I am a really big proponent of evaluation for learning. I think that given the kinds of problems that we are really generally trying to tackle with engaged research, big, thorny, wicked problems, climate impacts, health, well-being, we can't afford to not be continually improving our practice. We just can't afford to get to the end of a project and say, hey, well, that was great, but I have no idea why. Or, oh no, that fell apart. How do I not replicate those mistakes again? And so that's where evaluation comes in. So a lot of my more recent research has been focused on that. But the problem, of course, is, we need evaluation frameworks and indicators that actually fit this kind of work, not just, oh, okay, well, we published a couple of papers, why didn't the research get used? That framework doesn't work. So we need to develop fit-for-purpose evaluation frameworks for engaged research. First is this idea of measure what matters. Like I said, academic publications, in some contexts, that is exactly what our partners need. It is certainly the way many of us are evaluated professionally. But if that is not the goal of your research, you got to have a different way of doing that. So we need to set these different indicators, because that is, we work towards them, and they change the way, they change the system, they change the incentives. So we need to consider what it is that we are evaluating. And this is where we kind of go back to those principles that I shared earlier on. We need an evaluation approach that aligns specifically with engaged scholarship. So did we have substantive interactions through this process? So maybe our project really, really worked, and we can take a look back and say, oh yeah, look at, we had, all of these meetings, and we really had everybody at the table that needed to be there, and it really was substantive, and it was equitable. We can see evidence that everybody had a say in this, and so we start to build that evidence that, yeah, okay, that seems to be why it worked. Or the flip side, as sometimes happens, we actually excluded, accidentally we excluded a major stakeholder group here. No wonder this didn't get anywhere. We didn't have trust because we didn't have the right people at the table. And then we can look at the ways that the knowledge, was it usable? Was it used? How did it get used? And that can be our new sort of incentive that we're working toward. There are, like I said, as the funders change their expectations about this, as more higher education systems start to really take this seriously, we are seeing a real growth in models that are appropriate to engaged research and societal impacts. This is from a guidebook that I have the DOI on there. It is available online, that my colleague Gigi Owen and I put together to help jumpstart some of this and to help guide our colleagues through the process. And so these are the kinds of things that we're saying, think about the goals that you have for your research and how you're going to demonstrate the effectiveness. So it might be that instrumental impacts. It contributed to tangible changes in plans, practices, policies. Well, that depends on whether you have managed to, you might have needed to change people's knowledge or awareness of an issue. That's that conceptual knowledge. It might be that the folks you're working with, in order to make that policy change, also needed to have some, capacity changes within their organization. Connectivity impacts, that's that trust building, right? Especially important if this is a new partnership. If you can demonstrate that you have built that connectivity, you've got strengthened relationships, and they're enduring after the project ends, that might be the most appropriate output or outcome of a new partnership. And so we need to be really thinking about that. Attitude impacts tends to be how we're changing the academic system, how we're thinking about engaged research. And then ultimately that bottom one, the social and environmental impacts, that's what we want to get to, but it depends on all of those other ones. So we have to have the trust in the research. Somebody needs to be willing to use it, those instrumental impacts. And those impacts need to then hopefully contribute to a positive change in our social and environmental systems. One of the things that we find is that our engaged researchers, and this seems to be really common across the whole field, people still do struggle to describe their work. Sometimes it is just, well, it's just what I do. And so we see like some of the best engaged researchers out there who are just like, yeah, I don't know. I did this amazing thing with this community, but I don't know how to like sort of articulate that. So one of the things we've been working on lately is how to build some frameworks and some goals to really help people describe, both plan and describe their research when it's done. So these are the sort of 4 big pieces. You gotta have that goal. That goes right back to the principles, right? What is the goal of your research? What did you want to get done? Sometimes you can tie it to the Sustainable Development Goals. Those are out there, really common. A lot of people know them. Your organization might have very clear missions in this area, so you can use that as, I am aiming towards this. Your community or societal partners might be the ones who have said, we need to, like in the Hopi example, we need a local drought impacts monitoring system. We need to be able to make more informed decisions about drought and rangeland management. That is our goal, and everything flows from there. Then think about your engagement. How were your partners involved, and at what steps in the process? Really be willing to break that down and narrate that. Go back to those impact categories, the descriptors. How did we contribute to reaching that goal? Just being able to describe changes in each one of those categories. And really important, and this gets back to, this all should be evidence-based. Just like all good science, Where do you find the evidence of impact? Lots of different ways to do that. Some of it can be really informal, just getting feedback. You know, oh yeah, they call me all the time and ask great questions. This is how I know that we have trust. This is how I know that they're understanding the science. That is a great example of evidence of impact and change. Citations and policy documents can be a great example that, yep, we did it. We wanted to, you know, we wanted this to be informing policy, and there it is. We can see that it did. If, depending on the project, you might want to have a much more robust monitoring and evaluation study that really follows your work all the way through, and maybe even post research to see about those the system changes down the line. And because I think I have just hit my time, perfect. I'm going to leave you with this quote that really just hit me recently, that the mounting challenges we face are going to require strength and scale that none of us can achieve on our own. We simply can't do this work alone. And to me, that is the underpinning of why we do engaged research. It is, we've got to find effective, ethical, sustainable approaches to learning and acting together. It's a team sport. And we need everybody's knowledge and expertise and voice at the table. Thanks.
Thank you, Alison. We have time for questions. If you raise your hand, Dave or I will.
Over here. Thanks for a great talk. You opened with a great example of positive impact. Can you say more about the risks or costs of not doing this? So any useful failure stories of research going to waste or causing harm when people don't take this kind of approach?
So many examples of research not going to use. I mean, I think we all do it. I mean, it's sort of like, it's almost a trope at this point, right? Oh, I wrote this great report and it's sitting on the shelf collecting dust. So many. Right? That frustration of, but the science is out there. Why aren't people, using it? For one thing, we just need to move away from that sort of like deficit mentality that just, if they just had the science, they would act differently. We know that that's not right, that people are complex, systems are complex, and so it isn't, there isn't just a one-to-one. If they just had the science, they would do this differently. I heard a colleague use this example to explain engaged research a few years ago, and it's really stuck with me. If you have, he's in the medical sciences, if you have a cure for cancer, but you have no way of getting that out and sharing that with people, do you really have a cure for cancer? So if we have the best science, and we know it is rigorous and we know it is credible, but we have not done any of the legwork to move that out, to work with resource managers, to work with policymakers, or work with individual community members. What good is it doing? It is just sitting there. So I think that's a huge cost, right? Millions and millions and millions of billions of dollars of our research enterprise. We can't let it sit on the shelf. Does that? I can't think of a very specific example off the top of my, come and talk to me afterwards. I'm sure a million of my things are sitting on, dusty desks someplace.
Yeah, hi. So you had this example of the Hopi that approached you, right? And I think that probably is the best way, because if we try to approach people, sometimes it feels like we're trying to tell them what to do. So do you have pointers? How do we make us approachable, that they, come to us?
Yeah.
Because I'm open, but I also don't want to go and point the finger.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a great question, because you're absolutely right. There's a fine balance, right? We want to go out and let people know, hey, we're here, and we have some resources, and we have some knowledge, and we have some expertise. This is when really working through your networks can be so valuable. So, and also sometimes just showing up. But boundary organizations are great. If you know of organizations on your campus or within your agency that are already doing some community-based work or working with practitioners, start going to some of their meetings, start introducing yourself and say, hey, I'm really interested. This is my area of expertise, and I would love to pitch in on a project. And maybe that's the way you get started. If there are community events or community activities that are related to your research, can you go out and volunteer for a day and just kind of get to know the folks that are there? And that's a great way to build that trust. I'm just a really big fan of, work through your networks, because you're right, it can be intimidating on both sides, honestly, to just walk into like a room full of people that you've never met before and say, hey, I'm from the university and I'm here to help. You don't know the history of research and the university community relationship. And so I wouldn't want you to, step into something that you're not familiar with. So find the people that are already doing a little bit of this and just start those conversations there. And it is a process. Takes some time.
Hi there. Thanks for the talk. I was just wondering what your thoughts are on the efficacy and efficiency of requiring engagement on most grants as opposed to only large, long-term grants. I'm just thinking that a lot of smaller grants and grant cycles are short-term. They probably put a lot more pressure on communities and require more resources. They don't allow us to build trust with them as well. Sometimes it may be more effective to require engagement at an institutional level and allow scientists to engage that way.
100%. Yeah. Your mic was cutting out just a little bit, so I'll try to kind of rephrase it. Such a challenge. We often only get 2 to 3 years of funding, and that is a lot to ask of a community partner to kind of swoop in. We're going to work really hard for a couple of years, and then we're going to go away. We do have stakeholder fatigue is a real thing. So as funders are starting to make this shift, one of the things that we've been talking about is it's so great the funders have made this shift, and we might be slightly out over our skis because we don't necessarily have some of those partnerships set up, and we don't necessarily have a research workforce that is fully able to jump in and do this really ethically. So I like the idea of institutional engagement. I think that sort of goes back to what I was just saying. Can you find the folks at your institution who might already be engaged with communities and make this sort of an additive process so that we're not overburdening communities that, we take for, swinging wildly from might have been historically underserved and marginalized, and all of a sudden we're saying, oh, well, now I've got money from, NSF, and so, everybody is asking them for the same thing. We really do need to be very aware of that. That kind of goes back to some of those ethics. How are we bringing people in? So I think institutional level engagement is really important. I think work through our existing processes, and just, gosh, remember that people that you're asking to join your research are people with their own lives and priorities. And so if we're able to really make this a positive and beneficial experience, great. But also remember that they get to say, no thanks, that doesn't sound good, or we don't have the capacity or time to be doing that right now. And their lives trump your research process. They get to make that decision. So ultimately putting the control at the community level, I think, is valuable. And I'm not sure if I fully answered your question, but maybe we can talk afterwards too.
I'm with the Academy of Natural Sciences in Drexel University here in Philly, and we've been working in this space for a few years in terms of participatory research. Many things I'd be interested in discussing with you, but one thing that I'm thinking about when you have scientists communicating with non-scientists, and there's sort of a different understanding and tolerance for uncertainty that when people are looking for more specific answers. How have you found that in terms of the communication process for trying to bridge that gap?
Oh, it's so hard, right? So I work with a lot of climate research programs, and so we're talking, and then climate change adaptation, and so I have a lot of experience, I won't say expertise, but experience going into communities and saying, here's this climate model that projects change out for the next 80 years or something, and yeah, it might get hotter, maybe a few degrees, maybe 10 degrees, whatever that is. Taking the time to, that explain as carefully as possible. And this is that sort of like take it out of the black box, right? Like take the science out of the black box, explain what we know and what we don't know. And I actually think that being really willing to explain what we don't know does help build that trust. And it's not easy. And sometimes it is just, it is just a process of having that conversation. But being willing to say, hey, we're really certain. So a great example from the Southwest. We're pretty certain about our temperature projections. And not the exact number, but we know the trend in the Southwest is heading in a very specific direction. We get about half of our annual precipitation every year through the North American monsoon system. And that is unbelievably hard to model effectively. Again, I am drawing from my colleagues. I don't do this work, but I do have, at this point, a number of years of working with them. It's really important that we express to our community partners that when we show them precipitation projections for our region, when we're talking about adaptation planning, we have to really be willing to say, hey, we're really pretty sure about this temperature. Don't put a lot of stock in the precipitation projections. Here's what we do know, and here's why it's really hard for us to understand the monsoon and the precipitation projections. Find things with them, that, build on what we know, be honest about what we don't, and then we spend a lot of time just saying like, okay, so, but even if, for example, precipitation doesn't change, we could have absolutely steady precipitation. Just the temperature change alone means that the effect of the precipitation is changing. Actually, the character is changing. Share with them what we are pretty certain about and be really honest about what we're not. And try to build with them what that means for their system. Again, a community knows what floods already, what stays dry, what areas of town are at bigger risk from a big storm versus not. Sharing with them and sort of building that all together. But I hear you. I wish I had like just do this. I don't. Be honest and transparent. There's nothing worse for sort of blowing up a trusting relationship if we pretend to know something that we don't.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Alison, so much.
Thanks.